welcome back to Trash Course, and today we're going to cover some important topics. Okay, so we last left off with George Washington entering office. When he was inaugurated, Alexander Hamilton introduced his Hamilton program. Its goal was to make the United States a commercial and military power. However, there was some opposition to this. Madison and Jefferson thought this plan depended too much on close ties with Britain. After the whole independence debacle, they were not on board with this. Another thing that was happening during this time was the French Revolution. Washington declared America neutral, but America was divided between supporting Britain and supporting France. These disagreements and the Hamilton plan controversy led to the first political parties. The Federalists in the North supported Hamilton's plan and close ties with Britain. The Republicans in the South supported France and had more faith in a democratic self-government. Then, in 1796, President John Adams was elected president. As soon as Adams was elected, however, he had to deal with a lot of stuff. He had to deal with the Quasi-War, Friars Rebellion, and the XYZ affair. During his presidency, Adams passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien Act deported foreigners, mainly Republicans, and the Sedition Acts made it illegal to criticize the government. These acts targeted limiting civil liberties for Republicans. Then Jefferson was elected in 1800. One of the most important things that happened during Jefferson's presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, which was the purchase of the rights to that western half of the Mississippi River from France. He sent Lewis and Clark to explore this new land. During this time, the ongoing war between France and Britain hurt American trade. Jefferson tried to fix this by passing the Embargo Act, which banned all trade, but replaced it with the Non-Intercourse Act, which banned trade with Britain and France. Madison was elected after Jefferson, and he started the War of 1812. America was still a new nation, so it was difficult to finance this war. But Americans won many battles, including the Battle of New Orleans, which contributed to the growing sense of nationalism. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent, which was signed by Britain and American representatives in Ghent, Belgium.
Now on to Chapter 9. New technology was introduced, which greatly benefited the American people and economy. New roads were built, and steamboats allowed for fast transportation. Major canals were built, such as the Erie Canal, that allowed for easier travel and made New York City a major trade port. The first railroads were built, which opened the western frontier to be settled and linked to markets in the east. Also, the telegraph was introduced, which allowed for faster communication than ever before. New technology also harmed others. Eli Whitney's cotton gin increased cotton production and changed slavery in America. Around 1 million slaves were moved to the Deep South between 1800 and 1860. Slave trading also became much more of a business than ever before. Different regions in America formed different economies. The Northwest had an integrated economy with commercial farms and manufacturing cities, such as Cincinnati and Chicago. The East provided credit and a market for the Northwest. The East also was home to many of America's first factories, such as the Lowell Mills. Workers in factories followed an hourly schedule, and most of the New England textile mills relied on female and child labor. The South barely had any factories and depended on cash crops as the base of their economy. Because of the large economic expansion of the time, there was a large demand for labor. That caused many people to immigrate to the United States from abroad. Many came from Ireland and Germany and settled in the northern states. Also, America's religious and political freedoms attracted many European immigrants. They filled many low-wage, unskilled jobs. Because of the rise of immigrants, particularly Irish immigrants, the Catholic Church had a much larger presence in America, which caused many to be suspicious of new immigrants. These people, who feared immigrants would harm American political and social life, were called nativists.
I forgot. Oh well, it's fine. All right, you're good.
New expansion to the West promoted new ideas of freedom. The idea of manifest destiny first appeared, the ideology that the West would be the place for economic independence and the social condition of freedom. The Transcendentalists, who believed Ralph Waldo Emerson's views that freedom was an open-ended process of self-realization in which individuals can remake themselves. Americans are to understand that no person or the government had a right to interfere with the realm of the self. The Second Great Awakening added a religious undertone to these philosophical ideals of the time. Reverend Charles Gregson Finley became very famous for his preachings in upstate New York. Revivalist ministers also used the opportunity that the new market economy provided to spread their message. The new economy allowed for more opportunities for the self-made man, and it created the new middle class. Unfortunately, free blacks were barred from participation in the new economic opportunities. Free blacks were in the lowest rank of the labor market, and they were not allowed to access new public land in the West. Also during this time, the cult of domesticity was formed. It was the idea that women were to find freedom in fulfilling their duties in their sphere, the home. A new definition of femininity appeared, based on the values such as love, friendship, and mutual obligation. Virtue became closely associated with women. Not working outside of the home became a badge of respectability for women, but women who did work could only find low-paying jobs, either as domestic servants, factory workers, or seamstresses. Some people felt that the market revolution reduced their freedom. The first working men's parties were formed in the 1820s. A bit later, strikes became quite common. The idea that liberty, when calling for many used the word liberty when calling for improvements in the workplace. The idea that economic scrutiny was the main part of American freedom was the idea that economic security was a main part of American freedom was formed as a result of this time. Welcome to the Thought Thing. For Chapter 10. Let's talk about voting rights. Restrictions on voting lessened during this time. Property requirements for voting were eliminated by states. However, Rhode Island was the only exception. Wage earners organized the People's Convention in 1841 in response, where they created a new state constitution and where they elected Thomas Dorr as their governor. Unfortunately, their efforts were quashed by President John Taylor. By 1840, more than 90% of the adult white male population were eligible to vote. This led to the term citizen to become synonymous with the right to vote in America. New technology allowed for new voices to be heard. Steam power created a more effective printing method, and the penny press was made, but not the one where you'd put in a penny. The one we're paying for a newspaper only cost 1 penny. Now, the War of 1812 caused the economy to change after it was over. A new manufacturing sector emerged, and many believed that a necessary complement to the agricultural sector for national growth. By 1815, President James Madison put forward a blueprint for a government-promoted economic development plan. This was known as the American System. A new national bank would be formed, new tariffs would be put in place, and there would be federal financing for better roads and canals. Now let's go back to the idea of a new national bank. The Second Bank of the United States was formed to be a profit-making corporation that served the government. Local banks would also help the national bank. They promoted economic growth, but local banks also printed money. That caused the value of paper currency to fluctuate widely across the country. And the Bank of the United States was supposed to prevent the overinsurance of money. It did not work out well for everyone. There was a national panic, known as the Panic of 1819. Also, the Bank of the United States participated in speculative fever that swept the country after the War of 1812, which added to the panic. The Panic of 1819 disrupted the political harmony of the previous years in the United States. There was a new president during this time, James Monroe. His 2 terms in office saw many sectional debates arise, especially over Missouri petitioning for statehood in 1819. A debate arose over slavery and was solved with the Missouri Compromise, which was adopted by Congress in 1820. During this time, Spain's Latin American colonies rose in rebellion and established a series of independent nations. The Monroe administration became the very first government to extend diplomatic recognition to the new Latin American countries. However, they feared that Spain would try to regain its colonies, so Secretary of State John Quincy Adams drafted the Monroe Doctrine. It said that there would be no more European colonization of the New World. The United States would abstain from European affairs, and there would be no recolonization. The election of 1824 was the most complicated elections in American history. There were 4 candidates, but the main players were Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. When the time came to vote, none of the 4 candidates received a majority of the electoral votes. This caused the election to fall to the House of Representatives, and after a vote, John Quincy Adams won the presidency. He supported the American system, and he wished to enhance American influence in the Western Hemisphere. You could probably guess he advocated for a much more expansive government than most people believed there should be at the time. His views gave his political opponents much to use to get him out of office. And because of Adams' views, he was not able to garner enough support to win a second term. So during the election of 1828, the main players were instead Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson. The winner was Jackson, which caused a major change in American politics. During the election of 1828, politics had become much more of a spectacle and there was much more divide between political parties. Party machines emerged and a spoils system emerged. National conventions were held to choose candidates. The two main political parties of the time were the Democrats and the Whigs. The Democrats supported a weak federal government, reducing expenditures, reducing tariffs, and abolishing the national bank. The Whigs supported a strong federal government, in which they believed would promote welfare for the people. Now Jackson's presidency. During the beginning of his presidency, there was a nullification crisis. A new tariff, known as the Tariff of 1828, caused debate throughout the country between states' rights versus the federal government's rights. The South greatly disliked the tariff, and it led to South Carolina attempting to nullify the tariff. They were stopped by Jackson. Also, because of the expansion of cotton and slavery, many Native Americans were forced to be relocated. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 caused the relocation of many Native American tribes. One of them, the Cherokee, decided to go to the courts to help them keep their land. In the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, they were not considered citizens, so the Supreme Court could not help them. The Cherokees were removed from their lands, and on their walk to their new land, 4,000 of the 15,000 of them died. This later became known as the Trail of Tears. The Bank of the United States was under fire by Jackson. He distrusted the banks and vetoed a bill to renew the bank's charter. Jackson authorized the removal of federal funds from the vaults of the national banks and their deposit in local banks, or pet banks. There was a panic, like many times before, after complicated things happened to the economy. But this panic was known as the Panic of 1837. This panic was caused because prices rose dramatically, but real wages declined. Gold or silver was required by the American government and the Bank of England for payments. Cotton exports were also declining. The panic caused an economic depression until 1843. Also, Martin Van Buren was president during this time. The election of 1840 was fairly simple. The Whigs nominated William Henry Harrison, and his running mate was John Tyler. Because of the previous elections, now selling candidates and campaigns were as important as the platform for which they stood. Unfortunately, Harrison contracted pneumonia and died a month after taking office. Tyler succeeded him and vetoed the measures to enact the American system. Now, onto Chapter 11.
Okay, so during this time, cotton was a huge crop in the U.S. It was America's biggest export at the time. However, because it was so big, slaves were needed to work on the fields. Even though slave trade was banned, the slave and trade of slaves within the U.S. continued. Most people supported slavery during this time, but a few people started to speak out. People who were pro-slavery argued that slavery was essential to human progress, it guaranteed equality for whites, and that slavery allowed for white supremacy. They also used the Declaration of Independence to further their argument. Anti-slavery supporters argued that pro-slavery arguments only served the interests of slave owners. Most slaves in America worked on fields. They would work on large plantations doing different jobs that were needed. There were also some slaves in the city, and they worked as servants, cooks, and stuff. Okay, now let's talk about slave rights under slavery. They were considered property and had very few rights. They weren't allowed to learn to read or write, they couldn't testify against a white person, they couldn't carry firearms and things like that. Even free blacks enjoyed very few freedoms. They were allowed to own land and get married, but that was the only difference between them and slaves. They couldn't testify in court or serve on a jury, they couldn't even strike a white person, even in self-defense. A lot of slaves during this time bonded over the desire for freedom. Many of them even tried resisting against slavery. A common way for slaves to do that would be silent sabotage, like breaking tools, pretending to be sick, doing poor work, and stuff like that. Some of these slaves managed to escape. Slaves either went up north or went to where the free black population lived to blend in. Some of them escaped using the Underground Railroad and the help of Harriet Tubman. There was also a rise in slave revolts around 1800. Nat Turner led one of these revolts. He and his followers marched to Virginia attacking white families. This rebellion and other rebellions led to more slave laws that limited slave rights even more.